Okay, we are live. I always feel much better when I see the button up there telling me that we are live. Um, well, I want to say good evening and thank you for joining us for what's going to be a fascinating night tonight. Many of us listen to audiobooks. A well-read audiobook can really enhance the understanding and atmosphere of a book. Some of us here at One More Page listen to audiobooks and then read the book because it can be such a different experience. But most of us have no idea what goes into the production of an audiobook and the connection between the author and the voice actor narrating the book. Tonight we have a real treat. We're joined by one of our favorite authors, Laura Elliott, and she will be joined with Elizabeth Wiley, and they will discuss Laura's new young adult historical fiction novel, Walls. Elizabeth narrates the audio version of Walls. This lively conversation about storytelling and creating character will be moderated by director Megan Behm. We will get an interesting look at a side of the book industry that most of us aren't familiar with. And also kind of an interesting fact, Megan created the photo essay for Walls. So it really was a group effort of the three talented women here on the screen. In Walls, Drew is an Army brat, a hotshot athlete poised to become his high school star pitcher when he has to move for the sixth time in 15 years, this time to West Berlin, where American soldiers like his dad hold an outpost of democracy against communist Russia. Meanwhile, in East Berlin, his cousin Matthias has grown up in the wreckage left by Allied bombing during World War II on streets ruled by the Communist Party's secret police. Drew and Matthias begin to overcome the many walls between them and become wary friends, but as the political situation around them gets increasingly dire, their loyalty will be tested in ways that will change their lives forever. Laura Elliott was an award-winning magazine journalist in Washington, D.C. before becoming a New York Times bestselling author of historical and biographical young adult novels. Her 12 novels explore a variety of eras: the Italian Renaissance, the American Revolutionary War, World War II, and the Cold War. Elizabeth Wiley is a seasoned actor, director, theater professor, and voice actor who has found her greatest passion in audiobook narration, where she has earned a number of awards and nominations. She has over 135 titles in a wide range of genres. Megan Behm is a theater director, arts administrator, and intimacy director based in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm going to turn it over to these three women in just a moment, but I wanted to let you know if you have any questions or comments for Laura, Elizabeth, or Megan, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so if we don't respond to it right away, that's because we're saving it for the very end. So please join me in welcoming Laura, Elizabeth, and Megan.
Hey. Hello. Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Aileen, so much for that introduction. One More Page is a wonderful, wonderful bookstore, and we're always
favorite place.
Happy to be there. I have taken my stepdaughters there many times, and it's a wonderful spot. So I also just wanted to add to that introduction a little fun fact. Laura, Liz, and I have all worked together on this book, on this project in varying capacities. Laura is also my mother, full disclosure. We have worked together for a while, and it's a real joy. It's the family business, as we like to say. And Liz was actually one of my acting professors in college. And over a decade ago, said they should become friends, and now they are. And Liz narrates Mom's audiobooks, and it's the best thing in the world. So, here we are talking about all this. And this is really exciting, for us too, because the three of us so rarely get to compare notes about our process. And so that's what I'm going to do, is really ask Laura and Liz tonight to talk about the differences and the similarities in how we tell stories and in their different, respective fields. So we had a wonderful introduction to the book, but Laura, why don't you start us off by just giving a quick overview of how this book came to you, your inspiration, why you wanted to write it, all that stuff.
I have notes so that I don't get off track here, as I sometimes do, and need my director daughter to tell me to go back on something. Basically, I'll just say that Eileen was kind enough to say I'd been a magazine journalist for 20 years before I became a novelist. So, from that training, I'm always looking for holes in coverage. And I did that with a book on McCarthyism and on my book about Peggy Schuyler when everybody else was writing about Eliza. Peggy had 36 words, solo words in the musical with that, and Peggy. And she's this great Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of look at this beloved legend that Hamilton has become. So I was actually on tour for Peggy and sitting in coffee shops and listening to the news when our former president had his first meeting with Putin in Helsinki and denigrated NATO. And I wondered if people remembered what the original purpose of NATO was, just to put it in context for them, which of course was Russia's kind of brutal annexation of Eastern Europe after World War II and the Berlin Wall. Now, thinking of my YA audience was great. I was going to talk to all these students and kids and teenagers and young adults up to your age and women my age too. But I started asking teens and Gen Zers, is that how you'd say that?
Sure.
What they knew about NATO and the wall. And I get kind of this blank look and yeah, well, I know it was there, but not much else beyond that. So hole in coverage, right? So I started thinking, honestly, what could be a better show rather than tell story about the Cold War standoff and our kind of, Russia's longstanding antipathy for Western democracies. So especially given the fact that the Berlin Wall literally went up overnight on a holiday weekend when Berliners had been enjoying children's festivals and fireworks completely unsuspecting. The plan was so cunning and so meticulously timed out that they managed to start unfurling they unfurled 27 miles of barbed wire between midnight and dawn. And Berliners woke up trapped, basically, and families and friends and sweethearts separated. So it's quite a story. So I chose to depict both the harsh tragedy of the wall and the stunning courage of people who actually, fought against it through two cousins from the two sides of the Cold War. Drew, as Eileen was saying, this American Army kid stationed in West Berlin, and his cousin, Matthias, who has been raised in East Berlin in communist dogma and in the Soviet sector. It takes place during August 1960 to August 1961, in the year where all this tension between the United States and the Soviet Union really starts kind of roiling. And the question leading up to the climax of the wall going up. And the question of what it would take for an East Berlin youth who had been bombarded with anti-American propaganda, been raised up in the FDJ, the German youth group of that time, to come to trust a Westerner, and vice versa for Drew's sake, felt like a really poignant and powerful and relevant question to explore during this time of political polarization and the disinformation that is kind of fueling that now. So in the novel's opening, people can still cross back and forth within the city's zones. The boys' mothers really want them to become friends. This is actually going to bring a lot of dangerous scrutiny to both of the kids, and they get embroiled in this kind of this constant espionage and subterfuge and overtures from the KGB that were going on in Berlin at that time. So Liz is actually going to do this extraordinary thing and read for us. Liz, are you ready? And I'm going to introduce what you're going to be doing. Okay.
I sure am, yes.
Okay. I am so excited. You guys are so lucky to hear this. The scene that Liz is going to perform for us comes close to the end of the novel. And we're going to be careful not to give too much away about what's going on, because we want you to read it or listen to it, more importantly. But it really shows Liz's extraordinary talents as an actor. There are fast-paced moments. There's a chase scene. You'll see. And all these different characters in different languages. The setting is in Marienfelde, which was the refugee camp that we Americans ran in West Berlin for East Germans who managed to get over the line and managed to get into the American sector. Even then, you should know that they're not safe. It was a terrible risk to try to do it to begin with. Even when they get to the camp, though, they're not safe because the Stasi secret police and the KGB planted spies there for various reasons, which I'll explain to you afterward. You should also know for this reading that American military kids were in danger of being kidnapped by the Stasi if they got too close to the line, or if their father, typically then not in service, was of interest to them. And this had been a danger for Drew's little sister, Linda. Matthias had also been ratted out by a Spitzel, who was a neighborhood informant. And these two kind of 007 worthy truths and subplots collide in what Liz is going to read.
Okay, here we go. The teenager looked unhappy. His lean, angular figure slouched, like a kid sulking over being pulled out of class by the principal. As the man lectured him, the teen vehemently shook his head. Their disagreement escalated. The man put his hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy knocked it off. The man grabbed the teen's collar. The youth contorted and broke free, loping away straight toward Drew. Quickly turning, Drew leaned against the cinder block wall, stuck his hands in his pockets, and kicked at the ground as if he just happened to be there, pouting about a crisis of his own, as the youth rushed past him. At the same moment, the teen glanced back over his shoulder to make sure the man wasn't following him, and that's when Drew saw the boy's enormous eyes, one blue, one brown. It was the teenager who'd shared Matthias's home, the FDJ believer who'd shouted Freundschaft and made Matthias so skittish. The kid rewarded by the Stasi for something with a GDR Olympic tracksuit. Probably the Judas who'd turned him over to the tribunal. What the heck was he doing at Marienfelde? Then a more ominous question surged through Drew. How did this kid know the man from Wannsee Lake who'd gotten too close to Linda? Were they in cahoots somehow? Did the fact the bald official had singled out Matthias's neighbor from the other refugee youth suggest he was the guy's Stasi handler? Good God! Had the teen sent the man looking for them at the lake? For Linda? Drew spun around and saw that the man was already scuttling away. He let the guy go, bolting after the youth instead. If that boy had somehow endangered Linda, Drew was filled with wrath he didn't know he was capable of feeling. The German teen slowed to a walk on his way to rejoin the clutch of boys he'd left behind. He seemed completely unaware of Drew sprinting up behind him. Hey, you! Drew launched himself, wrapping his arm around the teen's neck, hurtling them both to the ground in an explosion of kicks and grunts. Wundervoll mir! The youth was bigger and stronger and punched Drew hard in the gut. He rolled Drew off of him and sprang to his feet, poised to flee, but Drew managed to kick out, buckling the German's knees and knocking him back down to the ground. Drew pounced, and they wrestled, flailing, cursing. People around them scattered, crying out, Ein Kampf! Ruf die Wache! Hilfe! Hilfe! For a triumphant moment, Drew had the German pinned and started shouting himself, This guy's a Spitzel! Get the MPs! Get my mother, Emily McMahon! The refugees around him panicked even more when he shouted the word Spitzel. The youth shoved himself up, hurling Drew off to land on his back, the wind knocked out of him. The teenager would have gotten away, but for Drew blindly grabbing his leg and hanging on, coughing and gagging as the teen kicked dirt in his face. That was enough. With an easy grab and jerk, 2 MPs separated the teens and dragged them both into the camp's main building. Drew spotted his mom running up the hall, tailed by her superior. He had never in his life been more relieved to see her. Mom! There's another guy, a man with a clipboard. He was talking to Linda at the lake. All right. Mr. Klein quieted Drew before telling the MPs to bring the boys to his office. He slammed the door shut behind them as the MPs shoved them into the seats. "You watch the way you manhandle my son," Drew's mother reprimanded the police with startling authority. They sheepishly yes ma'amed her. "What's the story, Drew?" Mr. Klein asked. "Go ahead, honey," his mom reassured him. The story cascaded out of him. Of the teen living in Matthias's house, of him wearing one of the Olympic tracksuits the GDR gave loyal youth fanatics for breaking TV antennas, of Matthias being pulled in front of an FDJ tribunal. "Probably because of this jerk," Drew concluded, pointing at the teenager beside him. Mr. Klein picked up the phone and called the security detail. Then everyone turned to the German teen. "Bitte," he snuffled, starting to cry. "I will tell all I know. Please, may I stay in the West?"
Bravo.
There we are. Whew.
It's so much better when you read it.
It's because you gave me the good stuff.
No, it's so much better.
That was great.
Thank you.
Whew.
So
It's athletic.
awesome. So Liz, there's so much in that to talk about, and Laura, there is as well. Liz, once you've sort of adjusted from doing that, since you've got your props up, can you talk a little bit about your process of turning a book into an audiobook and what that process is?
Absolutely. And I apologize for the glare in my glasses, but I'm trying to. These are the kind that are supposed to be good for screens, but then it has
Yes.
extra.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I get a book. I read the whole book through. First, I have to know the story. I have to see what story the author is telling, whose point of view it is, or if that shifts. What do I think the author wants to get across? So getting that sort of overview of everything. As I'm reading, I will also mark up things that I know I need to research, and that might be concepts, ideas, places, so that I understand it better. A lot of time it has to do with words and pronunciations of places and names and accents and foreign phrases and words. And Laura knows how to throw those at me, which is great. I love that. And sound effects. She's great at the sound effects. She really gives you she paints the whole sensory picture in it, and that gives me a lot to work with. I'm going to pull up. This is an iPad that I'm reading off of, and I use an app on here called iAnnotate. Let me pull it out of my holder. I don't know if you can see this at all because of the.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I can.
Yeah, I have all kinds of. Different narrators do it differently. I like to highlight different colors for different characters. It helps me kind of visually see what's coming up when I'm narrating. I also take notes in the margins. I can make bookmarks in the app, in the PDF. It's a PDF doc. I can make notes as to when characters appear, and when that happens, I also do a little sound clip of what that character sounds like. So when that character, I've established this character, for example, and they come up 3 chapters later, and I'm thinking, instead of having to go pull up that sound file and search through it, I can pull up this little sound clip I put right on here and go, oh yeah, that's what that person sounded like. Okay. So that helps me keep track of the characters. And there's always this little moment of when I'm just ready to start a book, there's this, and it's like going on stage at the beginning of a show. It's like, okay, here I go. I'm getting on the train. We're taking this journey. And, it's, there's always, yes, even though I'm by myself, there's still a sense of adrenaline at the beginning of a new book because it's so exciting.
Great.
Can I ask
Laura,
something? Can I ask something?
What?
Do you do it chapter by chapter, or how long do you go? Because it's quite a performance.
Yeah, I try to do a chapter in one sitting. Definitely, and you want to when you're taking a break, especially like an overnight break to the next day, you want it to be at least at a section break, because you might, you're going to have a different, even slightly different energy. Maybe you didn't sleep as well, or you whatever, are better hydrated. Hopefully you're always well hydrated. But yeah, so I try to get up and have a little walkabout every 30 minutes, but I try to not close down the studio for the day until I've finished a chapter or at least a section.
That would make sense.
So, Laura, what is it like for you when you hear audiobook versions of your books? What does it open up?
Well, when I hear Liz read my books, and this is the fourth one of my books that she's done, which, by the way, it's Under a War-Torn Sky, Suspect Red, Da Vinci's Tiger, and this one, Walls. You'll love them all. It's just such a thrill. And so I wrote down, I want to make sure I say all these things, but I'll just tell you the thing that I was just listening to, Liz, that's so wonderful. One of the things about writing is with different scenes in different parts of the book, there's a different pacing that has to happen. And on something like that, it has to be really staccato, and it has to really move, and it has to really, but it's clear too, and the characters have to come in and out. And it sounded so good when you did it. It's such a reaffirmation that I did that right. Thank God.
Yes.
Yes. But and just to, we can't capture everything in the reading, extraordinary reading she just did, but I do throw a huge ensemble of characters at Liz, and we'll talk a little bit more about, there was a reason I had to do that. And they're from different countries and different ages and different perspectives, and it was a lot. And in many scenes, there's a lot of back and forth all at the same time, like especially between the teenage boys when they're having spitball fights and that kind of stuff. There's scenes of heartbreak, and there's scenes of all this subterfuge and suspicion, like I said, ridiculous teen hijinks, and the sound effects. Your fireworks, by the way, were so good in this. I loved it. I had to play it over and over again. Buzzing the Soviet MiGs and all that kind of stuff. I was a musician, by training. I think the aural sound is really important to me. And there's songs and there's shakedowns of, and chase scenes and all this stuff. And she handles it all and adds this really wonderful emotional texture and this vitality and this life. And we had talked earlier about this, I just think human beings are storytellers. That's how we make sense of ourselves and of our legends. And it started around fires in caves. And that sense of being told stories, I think, is a real deep-seated love for us. I'm also really grateful to Liz that there were so many themes in this narration that I remember doing, but I remembered even more listening to her read. I've listened to you continuously for the last, 48 hours. And I wrote down this list of my themes that I probably would not have been able to do without listening to her. And what's really great is that because she has this actor's training, and because she was a specialist in dialect, right, at William and Mary, she has this amazing ability. Each voice has its own timbre and sound. But with the themes and all, she always gives, you can hear this, the acting is so wonderful because she adds that little moment of irony, or that little in the tone of the voice, or that little moment of shy affection or irritation that puts a spotlight on what, message I hope to convey in that section. That's wonderful. And she had me on the edge of my seat, and she made me cry.
You made me cry.
But I know all the words. You always make me cry in this one scene of Suspect Red, but in this one, I just wept through Aunt Hilde, I guess is how we say her, twice. And I'm really grateful, particularly for that piano scene, Liz, because that was a scene, I'll be honest with you all, I had to kind of fight to keep in. Because
Can you explain the piano scene before we talk about it too much more? Since folks are listening who have not read the book yet, I'm assuming.
Thank you. This is why I need this is
It's
why
all
I
good.
need again. It's in chapter 5. I actually wrote this down so I can remember. It's a Christmas Eve scene. Again, I don't want to give too much because there's kind of a hidden tragedy and a difficult to face trauma with Aunt Hilde that I have to be careful to lace really well and delicately through the course of the novel, so that at the final chapter, when there is kind of this epiphany, it makes sense to you, but it still surprises you a little bit, but not too much if you think about it, right? But it's critical. It's a critical moment. And you get the hint of it in this scene where she is Aunt Hilde is Matthias's grandmother. She's got terrible PTSD left over from the bombing during the war and the aftermath of the war and a trauma that occurred to her. She hasn't left that apartment for 15 years. And yet, after meeting Drew's family and mother, who she'd never met before, her niece, she's willing to come to their apartment. She actually comes out, and there's a piano there. And there's a mystery about her piano, which you'll learn about later, but she hasn't played for 15 years. And while everybody else is exchanging Christmas presents, this frightened, wan, tiny little woman goes over to the piano and plays. And it was a hard scene to write for many reasons, but also because I had to get this pathos out, but not too much.
Mm-hmm.
I had to have, kind of the incantational magic of music in my mind, and classical music without being too geeky. And I had to be truthful, but not too harsh. It was this, and Liz got it so perfectly. And I'm really grateful to you for that.
I'm so glad. I just want to do justice to the great way you tell stories.
It's more than justice. It's a beautiful performance. So, and it's a bigger and larger story because of you. So thank you.
So both of you have just said a lot of great things about character. And, as we said, this book does have a lot of different characters, but that is sort of a trademark of most of your books, I would say.
I guess it is, isn't it?
Big sort of ensembles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I have always felt that you're very talented at creating unique and distinctive characters and having distinct voices. And I'm going to talk about how that transfers to audiobooks in a minute, but just in terms of your writing process, how do you get inside the minds of, for example, a train car full of teenage boys who somehow all sound different, even though you are yourself not a teenage boy? You know what I mean? Like, can you talk about that? How you crawl inside the brain of even secondary characters?
Thank you. Well, that honestly, Megan, that's one of the biggest compliments you can give me. So thank you. A part of it, I would turn it back to you all. You two are actors. How do you get into your characters, right? You do research, you absorb, and then you imagine, right? You stand in that person's shoes. How would I react if I had that? Now, part of it is my journalistic training. I've talked about this before, but when you spend 20 years, and I did long, what people now call creative nonfiction, but long, like 6,000, 8,000 word stories where I would follow people for a month and write things in scenes. So I had to listen. I had to try to write down their words, word for word, so that I got their syntax, their sound, their quirks when they talked. I watched. So I think that helped. You have a brother, I have a son who is quite the athlete. So, a D1 athlete. And I spent a lot of time with his teams, listening to them, that kind of wonderful slight swagger that they've got with that vulnerability, that, that unbelievable kind of courage to the goal. And yet sweetness, there's at that age, they're just a beautiful mixture of different things. And with those military kids in particular, I'll just say, my dad was a World War II veteran. He was in the reserves for 20 some years. I grew up near the Pentagon. A lot of my friends were military kids growing up. So I was sort of familiar with the type. I did a lot of reading, and then I had the great good fortune of interviewing some Berlin brats who have an alumni group on the internet. I tracked them down. They were so kind and spent so much time talking to me. I read, articles from their time. I would look at ads. I listened to movies from that time. I absorb, so I get that stuff. But those military kids are fairly emblematic of responses to moving around constantly. Like, Drew is Mr. Earnest he's like he's that good Joe kid but he hasn't quite figured out how to do the right thing yet, even though he wants to. He's in the process of figuring that out, and we take that journey with him. Joyce and his best friend Charlie are those natural born leaders that are often in the military world. Those military kids are brave, they're resilient. A lot of them just have that kind of instinctive inclusiveness ability to lead. Bob is Drew's foil, and he's the bad boy, borderline bully, swaggering because he's insecure and he's trying to make his way into the group quickly. So those, and what we really come to learn about him is that he's trying desperately to impress his dad, right? And then there's Drew's mom, who is like, I wanted to do a major salute to all those military spouses who have to shift their own dreams to move every 2 years. And they tend to be do-gooders and they tend to be doers, right? They tend to, and Drew's mom very much, she spotted a hole where she could be useful at that army post. She speaks German, she can be a translator, she can help, and she steps up. And they're like that. So just by kind of identifying them that way, they immediately have a type of personality that then I can grow. Oh, and the last one that I would say, who one of my favorites, and sort of, you get your inspiration from many places, like an incredibly brilliant daughter. Just like I get the, amazing, the gentleman scholar athlete with Peter. With Megan, Shirley very much becomes that intellectual achiever. She's somebody who takes in travel and knows that she can learn and grow and learn about that history and learn about that culture. And, I hope she becomes an ambassador when she grows up. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, of course. Just one last thing before I sort of shift over to Liz for a minute, just because I have this inside information. You've been able to travel to most of the other places you've written about, but you couldn't for this one.
Yes.
So, how did you create such a specific setting when you couldn't do the kind of journalistic reporting that you often do, where you absorb the sounds and smells and the texture? Like, you couldn't do that for this book. So how did you do that instead?
It made me crazy, as you know. Well, I'm going to my bookshelf for a second. I got, a ridiculous amount of books. I found really obscure things like this that has all these, photographs that I went through, and you see on my little sticky notes. And then I managed to find a handbook, a reprint of all the handbooks that would have been given to Army families when they came in from the 50s and the 60s. And there is this footnote in here, by the way. Megan knows how much I love my footnotes, that I highlighted and marked in red because I went, oh my God, what? There's just this little footnote when
they drop the most casual stuff in those things, or the most crazy stuff, like, oh, by the way,
Yeah, so here's a whopper. In this, welcome to Berlin. You're going to love it. You can go see this and see that. And by the way, footnote number 1, by 1959, there had been 255 kidnappings and 340 attempted kidnappings in West Berlin of military personnel.
For the explanation, we're just going to leave that there casually.
Yeah, and they reference this thing that I could not find. I got to tell you, I crawled into the Library of Congress. I could not find this thing. The reference, yeah. So I did all that. I honest to God, there are these amazing bunch of movies that were filmed in the 1950s and early 60s where they got into East Berlin, and I could really see it. And as you know, because you did the photo essay, there are extraordinary photos that are just so stark and just take your breath away. And then I found, those military kids who could tell me all these different things, which we want to get to Liz in a minute. I'll just say, I also find people who can help me. One of Peter's friends is a German actor. He lives in Berlin, and he very kindly went to a number of museums for me and translated everything he saw. And there were several museums that have kind of extraordinary, like the photograph of all the kids being toilet trained all together so that they learn to be a group. Okay, that kind of thing. So,
Wow.
but research.
Great. So Liz, how do
Fabulous.
you come up with and create different voices for each character? How do you find those voices?
Well, I look all over for inspiration. Sometimes I draw from real life. I think in Drew's mom, I pulled some of my sister-in-law, who was a military wife. And Bob's mom, I'm sure I pulled some from the mom of my best friend in 5th grade. I just heard her. And then, of course, when we get into when the book references media or public figures, we have JFK, so I could go actually listen to his speeches, of course. But we've got the book set in this time period, 1960, 1961, and that carries with it a language of the era of the youth, and also a style. And so I might go look at some Leave It to Beaver and look at Lumpy and go, oh yeah, that was the bully character. I might get some inspiration from film actors today. I might hear a Tom Hanks voice for one of the male figures. But I don't purposefully go through and find a person on whom to model each character. Sometimes it just comes out of an instinct, of a conglomeration of all these experiences and people I have in my own past. For the dialects, there are resources that I go to online. So fortunate today that we have all of these resources we can go to. There's a dialects online archive. We can pull up public figures from different countries being interviewed. I think I listened to an older woman with a German accent when I was thinking of Aunt Hilde. So it really is I pull from everywhere and invent out of using pieces pulled together. The one thing I want to mention in addition to this is that yes, there were German phrases, and having done a number of books around World War II, etc. I don't speak German, but I can read, I can pronounce it fairly well by now, and I also studied French, so that's not a problem. But then the Russian comes to me. Whoa, I've got Russian phrases, and I love it, and I can't follow my usual hunt and search to find the phrase because I've got a Cyrillic alphabet that is transliterated here, and so trying to find that. So I went to a Russian language instructor at William and Mary, and so shout out to Bella Ginsbursky Bloom, who just embraced this and said, oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah. And the next day she sent me back a video recording where she'd written everything out with International Phonetic Alphabet. And I could see her in the video, so I could see the way her mouth was shaped. She spoke it slowly. She spoke it up to tempo. And so I really was just watching and listening and repeating and listening and repeating. And gall darn if I didn't listen back to how that chapter came out, and it sounds like I speak fluent Russian.
You sound perfect.
Well, to my ears, but
and y'all, I just want to tell you that Liz did all that amount of work, and thank you to the professor as well for literally maybe 2 paragraphs worth of exchange That was a lot of work for you to do for that brief encounter with that Russian officer who scares the bejeebies out of everybody.
Well, we
So,
have to
thank you.
stay in the story, and I
Yes.
want to
Thank you.
keep us engaged and feeling like we're immersed in it. And that's
Okay.
part of our challenge as narrators, is that, how do you know if something is not working? If it pulls the listener out of the story to go,
Right.
oh, that sounded weird, or then I haven't done my job. So my job is to keep the story, is to build up that aural sounds landscape, enough that you're seeing all the visuals and really engaged in your story. So
Well, I
love
also
that.
really just pass a thank you on from teachers who have said to me, originally I had to kind of fight to keep the French and the German in that world in Under War Torn Sky. And for all those French students who are reading it, it's simple French. I kept it simple
Yeah.
and pretty anglicized, frankly. And they feel so good about themselves when they know what it says, even though I
Right.
sort of basically gives them the context. So many teachers have told me what a big boost that has been for those kids. It's also, I want us to think more internationally.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
want my readers to have to push a little bit. So thank you. I mean, your narrations make that really so much more feasible for them. So thank you.
Well,
Well,
I would also argue too that, as listeners and as readers, if we're hearing a voice we don't, or an accent we don't know, or sorry, a dialect or a language we don't know, but the main character doesn't know it either, it is sort of a proxy or a stand-in for
Yeah.
that sense of confusion, that
Exactly.
terror,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I think it's a really useful tool.
And
Um,
to have, and to also be, for me, to, like, if there's a German phrase, am I an American speaking German and my German is okay? Or am I a German speaking German and I'm trying to get that fluency or learning stage coming across in how Americanized it sounds, or not?
That's a really good. I honestly hadn't thought about that, but that's a
Well,
really good point.
where you do it really beautifully is in Suspect Red with Teresa and her English
Right.
from her Czech, and it's lovely because it's just and you get a little slight hint of it in Vlad sometimes too, the teenager. So thank you. She's just extraordinary, you guys. Can you tell? She's just amazing. So
Well, okay, so in the excerpt we just listened to, but then also in everything you're talking about, there's a lot of switching back and forth between people that sound wildly different. So Liz, how do you do that? Because the way you're talking about recording these chapters is it's not like you're doing something over and over until you get it right and then editing and cobbling things together. You have to be able to sort of do it all in one go. So how do you do those switches?
Okay, I have two answers. The first answer is not satisfying, but I'll say practice, practice, practice.
No, that's valid.
Okay. And the second answer is I stop a lot. I'm not going to go for pages and then, that reading, there were, you heard little hiccups where it's like, oh, I had to go back and say that word again. But I might, I have to stop all the time and go back to the beginning of a paragraph or beginning of a sentence. If a new character comes up, or it's like, oh, here's the mom again. Shoot. Stop. Place my cursor in my, on my in my place where the sound wave indicates that's where the new sentence is, and it's like, okay. And then I start again. But you don't hear all of that.
Right.
Yeah. So
But do you have I've you and I have talked about this, but in the past in different contexts, do you have physical things you do to help you get in character when you're doing these things, or are you
I
able
do,
to do it?
and I think that I'm, as an actor and as an acting instructor, I say it absolutely is a whole body thing. Okay, so now I'm in the booth, and I have done books standing up. I have to have a cushy mat, and it gets really tiring. So mostly, I would say most audiobook narrators narrate sitting down. What you can't see that I'm sitting on is a saddle-shaped stool that swivels. Uh, um, but
Why does it not surprise me?
No, but that makes
yeah,
sense.
I'm in the saddle. But yeah, I've had to rein myself in because bumping the mic, and it's like, oh, okay, let's do that over and not bump the things. I can't wear clothing that swishes. It's like, what, and then I'll get the, I'll send my things in to be proofed, and they'll come back and they say, what are you wearing in the booth? It's swishy. It's like, well, don't make so much hand movement. It's like, oh, I know it. I'll put on a t-shirt. I'll take everything off. So, but yes, for me, character, there is a feeling of character that has to be in how they carry themselves, where the voice sits in the body, and where it sits in the mouth, and their tempo and their rhythm, and going through that reading we did just earlier, that was such a physical episode, and I have to, in order to capture the rhythms of it, I have to imagine that he's grabbing this guy around the neck, and that he's being slammed back, and he's getting his breath knocked out of him, so that I carry that energy of action into the words, and so hopefully, or if I'm in a easier kind of laying low or going forward with caution, I have to, keep that physical feeling too. So the action, the character, it all is in the body. And yes, I have to rein it in, and I get in trouble sometimes when I make noise that I'm not supposed to make.
So there's, I mean, there's so many places I want to go from there in terms of talking about all this, but we've sort of circled around this, and I think it would be useful to talk about, these details that we've been talking about so much, about the characters and the setting and all of that. There is also, of course, a lot of history to pack in there. So this is a question, for you, Laura, like, how do you find that balance of having this sort of your love for history and research, and having all of that be, because so much of the history in your books is factual, but the characters are not. So,
Correct.
well, sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't.
Right. Not in this one, though.
But every situation you put them in is plausible,
Yes.
right? So you're not taking liberties with history here. So how do you balance that sort of like, this is what definitely absolutely happened, I have to get these places and these dates in, but then it applies to real people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Wonderful question. And I'm going to try to be really careful to be succinct, because I could talk at you for a half an hour about this, because it's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest joy and the biggest challenge in historical fiction, in that I'm learning all the time. I love the fact that I'm reading all this stuff and I'm learning all this stuff, and then I can only use about 30% of it, right? But then I also have to be really careful that I'm not doing info dumps, and like, here's what you should learn here. Because that kills a narration, and it kills the story and the plot and the pacing and the moving. And the biggest thing I have to be able to do, I came up with a good phrase for it yesterday, is judicious dribbling of little bits and pieces, and tucking and tucking and tucking. I actually, knowing Liz was going to be reading this particular passage, while I was listening up to it, just for the sake of argument, I actually marked all the different little tiny drops that I made to lead to that, what happened in Marienfelde. We'll just take, for instance, I'll take two people, personas who are mentioned there. Unfortunately, we don't have Matthias in there, but Matthias is in the backdrop of all that's happening because of this teenager who has endangered Matthias. So let's just start, for instance, with the bald guy, all right, who was seeming to threaten Linda at Vanzi Lake. Is that how you say it?
Vanzi Lake, yep.
All right. So where did I get that guy from? Okay, well, we start with, remember that footnote, the thing about the kidnapping? And I'm going, oh my God, how do I verify that? Okay, that's my first little fact, right? Now, I'm not going to say in my narrate, my story that that there were 255 kidnappings. What I have to do is drop it in and follow. Is that plausible, for instance? So I found that, just for instance, the way I had that footnote, I then found this really fascinating. It's a great movie if you guys want to watch it. It's called Night People, and it stars Gregory Peck in a role you've never seen Gregory Peck in before, which starts with a soldier walking home his sweet little German girlfriend and being nabbed and pulled off to be held for ransom. And then Gregory Peck as the head of the MPs, basically, I think, trying to negotiate his release, that then takes him into all these double agents, into the Stasi, all this subterfuge. And we'll give you him if you give us these people who are ex-Nazis, or maybe they're not. And it was all kind of based on truth. I went from there, starting to read, different things. And that's when I discovered that internet group, tracked down, the person who was head of it, asked, are there some people I could talk to a bunch of different people, came across this lovely man named George Gilmore, who actually then sent me, corroborated a lot of, were there really kidnappings and that kind of stuff? And he said, I should send you my father's memoirs. He was a counterintelligence officer. So he sent me his father's memoirs. And here, very matter-of-factly, he talks about, yes, the East Germans and Soviets tried to recruit me on 3 separate occasions. And then he starts talking about, they dropped a letter in my mailbox. They left something on my windshield. They offered me $9,000 a month if I would just talk to them. They called me. I mean, it was all here, right? So it has to be kind of dribbled all the way through, right? And he talks about Marienfelde. He talks about a secretary who was planted there, which I won't give the details of because it's a little sordid. But everything that's in that chapter, I got starting from here. And then with the boy who is threatening Matthias, it took me a little bit to get into Matthias's head. I had to be honest, and why this kid would want to, why he would believe in this, the workers' utopia kind of thing, which I was able to get by watching a PBS program called Line of Separation, which is really wonderful about this small, and it's based in fact of this small town that got actually divided just like Berlin did, but it going through the whole process of being taken over, and this young idealistic youth who believes in the promise of socialism, and not the fact of it and how it becomes corrupted in the communist system. So having gotten that in my head, then I was able to find, I have on my books here, I was able to find like these memoirs, kind of these heartbreaking memoirs of, for instance, a boy who was in East Germany, who was an American, but he recounts being called in for not being enthusiastic enough in class, not being enthusiastic enough in the May Day parades, being turned on and reported by his buddies who were ardent VDJ believers, the East Germans and the Soviet Union overseeing East Germany pressured and rewarded youth for policing and reporting one another. So, with all those, and then there were the things about music. The other aspect of Matthias, and one connection for these boys is music, even though Matthias begins as kind of this ardent believer, very idealistic, and he has that kind of sardonic, wonderfully droll European sense of humor that, he pulls on playing with the language with Drew. he's still the typical teenager, right? Who uh, is attracted to and kind of completely taken with American rock and roll, which is about youth and a little bit of rebellion against authority and individuality. And he could hear it drifting in on the radio, and he could listen to it, but it's totally outlawed where he lives. And if he gets caught, he could be pulled in front of a peer tribunal, forced to give a self-criticism. If he's not contrite enough, he could maybe be yanked out of his academic school and sent to a re-education camp. I mean, it was dangerous listening to music, right? And so all those little detail, all that fact that I read and I kept getting from like here and like there, none of it was in one place. It was in like 14 different things I had to read. And like that beautiful symbol of the fact that people so wanted to hear American jazz that when our State Department sent big bands over to play in cultural diplomacy, that they were pirating recordings they pulled out of the trash x-rays, chest x-rays, cut them into circles and pirated a recording on those x-rays.
Crazy.
And that image of American music over top communist hearts is just such an amazing symbol, right? And that was just a throwaway sentence of, yeah, they so loved David Brubeck that there were all these people trying to make. So I had to take that and take all this other stuff and like, where am I going to drop it? Okay, I drop it in the Sadie Hawkins dance because here's this communist kid, Joyce invites him to go to, because mom wants him to go and be integrated with them. They take him to a Sadie Hawkins dance, which is about as America as you can get, right? With little Abner and Daisy May and, all that stuff and Elvis playing. And here's Matthias over there going, oh, God, that's so exciting. Like, oh my God, I shouldn't be thinking about this because this is poison. This is trash. This is barbaric. This is animalistic. These are all the terms that the GDR used about American music. So I sprinkle in a little bit there where he says, I can't listen to it. And then we're at the jazz cafe and I sprinkle in a little bit about, the Russian and the, music from the recording, pirated recording on those x-rays. And then I eventually come to the place where Drew is over in Matthias's house and he sees all these books and Matthias has these records that he's pulled out of the trash cans in the West, which is what evidently kids would do. They'd go into record stores where they had demos and they say, gee, I just listened to this and there's a scratch in it. You might want to, this isn't working anymore. It was absolutely fine. But the clerks in the West, where they had plenty of these things, would go, okay, that one doesn't work. They threw the demo out in the trash. And these East German kids so desperate to get that, because this is when they could still go back and forth, would take it from their trash and take it home. But of course, if they got caught by the Vopos, they would be accused of culture barbarie, which is cultural corruption, which is akin to sedition. So I'm sorry, am I answering your question?
That's great.
It has to be dribbled, all these different facts.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the passion was amazing. I love that. I'm just sorry we have to wind down. We're almost out of time. But I wanted to let anybody who came in partway through or anybody who wants to listen to it again, that this will be up on our YouTube channel as well as on our Facebook page. So you can go and catch up with it again, because I know there was just so much information and it was so interesting. And Megan, I forgot your connections to Laura.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But as soon as you said that, I remembered it.
Yeah, there's an amazing photo essay that goes with this book, you guys, that punctuates what happens in each month, which was horrendous to research and to get all the rights to, and to make sure that it was all different and it flowed. And that's all thanks to
the
Megan.
National Archives gave me a lot of weird looks for some reason. They didn't understand why I was so interested in military history from 1961 to 1961.
Well, but what's so cool is this gave people a really much broader view of all this, not all the stuff, some of the elements that go into, making a successful book, and one that is, the word complete doesn't do justice to it, but that, is so, thoughtful and informative as well, so not just a story, but also the history behind it, which is something you do so well in all of your books, Laura. So it's kind of cool that you all work together on that. Thank you. So possibly we'll be seeing another joint venture in the future, hopefully.
So. Thank you.
Thank you all for taking this time out on a Friday night in the summer to share that with us. And it was just so much fun. Thanks so much.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Beautiful performance. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight.
Yes, thank you.